at the party later tonight. And there we go. Without further ado, across to Baron.
Thank you very much. Right, I'm Baron VK of the VK Fetish, and I, for my sins, am a violet wand enthusiast, or not, as some people call it. I've been restoring violet wands for at least 15 years. My first experience of a violet wand was when I discovered one in my grandmother's loft, which is a strange place to find one, but more of that later. Violet wands, a history of them. I could probably go on for quite a long time about the history of violet wands, but time limits me to give you a brief history, so that's what I will do. A violet wand, or violet ray to give them the correct name, is a device that was used from the early 1920s, or even earlier than that, to cure all ills. And when I say all ills, anything that was wrong with you, whatever that might be, a violet wand was purported to cure it. Now, sadly, it's become apparent as the years have passed, that wasn't the case, nor has it ever been. It was a quack medical device, but going back through the history of it, you can understand why that was the case. They first came to the fore in possibly the 1910s, when electricity was very new and very strange. Before then, people knew about gas to light and heat their homes. They could see it, they could feel it, they could smell it. Electricity was strange. They couldn't see it, apart from when they touched the plug in it. Electric people, when they died, they sort of start from home. They couldn't smell it, they couldn't feel it, touch it. It was wondrous, it was magic. Bear in mind, this was the Edwardian era. People were easily confused and bedazzled by people, not just in England, but in Europe and to a certain extent America as well, by the wondrous new electrical devices. Now, the history, going right back to the beginning of the violet wand, is that the principle is a Tesla coil. Tesla, as you may or may not know, was a very, very clever chap who was Polish. I'm going to say Polish. I think his name, Polish immigrant to America. Very poor man who had some great ideas, and in the early part of the century went up against Edison and his DC electrical circuits. Tesla had decided then, from his experiments, and he was a great scientist, that AC, alternating current, was the way forward. And as we all know today, AC was, alternating current was the one that is now, or the stuff that comes out of your socket is AC, it's not DC. Edison lost out to that, and a good thing really. It's nice to see the little guy winning sometimes. Sadly, Tesla died in poverty, because that's quite often what happens to the little man. But his ideas have become used worldwide. The problem was with DC, you couldn't transform it. When I say transform it, whatever voltage you've got with DC, there's no way of making it a higher voltage. When you've got AC, you can start with a low voltage, and by a simple coil transformer, you can make it into a higher voltage. That was the principle of the Tesla coil. Now, you may or may not have seen, there's actually some quite amazing photograph of Tesla sat inside a giant Tesla coil, which is all around him, and the sparks flying all around him, and it's like lightning bolts everywhere. Now, the good thing was it didn't kill him because of what's called the Faraday effect. It's the same reason why if an aeroplane gets struck by lightning, everybody inside doesn't get killed, basically because the electric current disperses over the surface of the plane rather than killing the people inside. That's going off a little bit of a tangent, but basically Tesla is the man that's responsible for the Tesla coil, which is at the heart of all basic violet wands, all electromechanical violet wands. Basically, the coil transfers the voltage to a high voltage. It also has a vibrating contact which interrupts that voltage and buzzes, basically, which is a noise you can hear from the machine. which then makes the frequency of that voltage change up and down, and it increases the frequency to a high rate. So the voltage and the frequency you're getting on the violet one is somewhere in the region of 30 to 50,000 volts at a similar frequency, whereas the voltage that's coming out your main socket is 220 volts at 50 hertz. Big difference is 220 volts at the sort of current that comes out of the electric socket can kill you. A violet one, generally speaking, can't. I say generally speaking. More of that later. So violet ones initially were used by practitioners of the art. They started with big sets with a selection of electrodes, and the electrodes you can see at the back there. Now every electrode was designed to cure, inverted commas, a particular ailment, depending on its size and shape and what it was used for. It would cure such things as rheumatism, arthritis, baldness, earache, constipation. You can tell I'm hesitating with some, in fact, all of that list.
One worked.
Go on.
The fluorination electrode for removing warts.
I was getting to that.
Sorry.
There is actually two. The fluorination electrode, which I can point out, was designed for getting rid of warts. It didn't work because basically it gets very, very hot. It's probably on a scale of 1 to 10, it's up there on the 9.5 range as the nastiest, if that's the right word, electrode. It gets very hot, and if you put it on a wart, it will get rid of it. I've tried it, and it works. That's probably one of two that works. The other one that works, although not for the reason it is, very, very common electrode, which is probably one of the 3 electrodes in the basic set, is a cone. They came in 2 styles, one like that, one like that. That was to cure baldness. Now, I've been trying it for 5 years. That proves it doesn't work. But bear in mind, in the 1920s and 30s, there was something that was very, very, very common. Head lice, nits, pubic lice. Well, you start combing your hair, all right, it'll cure the baldness. By hell, it zaps those nits and down they fall. It worked. They actually sell something very similar for curing your cat's fleas these days. You comb your cat and the fleas drop out. That's a different matter entirely. So that's one of 2. You've got to admit, but they didn't realise that that's what it was doing, but it didn't do very much for baldness. Some of the things it could cure, the list goes on and on. It is just ridiculous. One of the most frightening and one of the few electrodes that I haven't actually tried for its original purpose is that little baby there. That's quite a rare electrode, you must go. I've got 2 of them, whether or not. Anybody, any ideas what that might be used for?
Blindness.
Well, close. Cataracts. The practitioner asks you to close your eyes and you put it there and put the current through your eyes. And of course, he got the money first. and then after maybe a couple of minutes, he'd take it away and the patient would open their eyes and rub the smouldering eyeballs and say, "I'm sorry, it's not work. Can I have my money back?" Hello? Where's he gone? And of course, the chap's away down the road with his 3 shillings and 9 couldn't see, doesn't care. So that is it's quite a rare electrode. They change hands at silly amounts of money, simply because everybody wants one, but nobody wants to use one. That is one which I certainly wouldn't use. Most of the other electrodes are basically much of a muchness. They were designed with a specific purpose to cure a specific ailment, and the shape or size of them was as such to cure it. A lot of ideas were to cure rheumatism. Now, initially, all these devices were supposed to be used against the skin. You put the electrode against your skin, rubbed it or rolled it in some instance against your skin. Now, the thing is, it gives you quite a warm sensation, and you can actually feel that it's getting warm after a few minutes. If you've got more rheumatism or arthritis, you get next to a fire, and it warms you up, and it feels better. So to a certain extent, it made you feel better, but that's only because it's warming you up. You could have done just the same by standing near, put your hands behind your back, stand near to a coal fire, and relax. Will work just as well. Anyway, as time went on and people started to get an electric light bulb in their home, and when I say that was probably all about one in the living room, hanging from the ceiling with a little chain link to turn it on and off. Then smaller sets started to appear on the market, which were very, very basic, but more affordable. So people, instead of having to go and pay a practitioner to pay for the treatments, could do their own treatments at home. And that's where violet rays, as they were called then, correctly are now, started to really take off. And in UK and Europe, and to a certain extent America, they really took off. They sold in their tens of thousands because everybody wanted the new wooden treatment. Now, bearing in mind this was way before the National Health Service in this country, so if you wanted to treat something, it was going to cost you. So if you could buy one of these, quite often the family would buy one together or even buy one with neighbours. And there's talk of people buying one, a street would buy one. I've actually seen a thing about the street of somebody in Salford in Manchester where the street clubbed together and bought a violet wand in the early 1920s and shared it. We'll have it on Sunday, you can have it on Monday. They were still expensive. I don't actually have any figures as to how much they were, but they were still quite an investment. But they were certainly nowhere as nearly expensive as the bigger sets with lots of electrodes, because that's what you're paying for, the amount of electrodes, which look impressive. That's a set from the late 60s, early 70s actually. No, 80s. That's got quite a few electrodes. I've got some sets, as many as 25 or even 30 electrodes. Quite often German and French sets have that sort of number of electrodes. But a basic English set, this is one example of such a set, that is from the 70s, which, believe it or not, they were still making them, would have 3 electrodes. The 3 electrodes that they would generally have would be a comb electrode, as I was explaining, which would be used for combing your hair or whatever. A mushroom electrode, which is like that baby there, which was a general electrode. You could rub it against your skin or whatever. Actually quite good for acne, that's another story, I'll do that later. And they used to have a strange metal rod, which was different to every electrode because it was metal. Now, it was very worrying. Well, it's worrying to me. The problem with the metal rod was, and the reason for the metal rod was, it was an indirect contact. So basically, unlike the glass electrodes, which the practitioner or the family member put in the electrode holder and rubbed them against the skin or applied it to the part that was requiring treatment, with the secondary contact, the metal contact was put in the end of the wand, and the person that was operating the wand grabbed hold of it and turned it on. So then, at that point, they were the violet wand. So if they then applied their fingers to another person, the electricity would flow through them and to the other person. And you could feel, if you actually touch the person and hold them, you can feel sort of a strange buzzing between the two of you. If you move your fingers away a little bit, you can get sparks between you, which is, I think, quite fun. Now, that is fun as long as the violet wand is working correctly. And this is what I said earlier, violet wands don't generally kill people. The problem was that if anything went wrong with the violet wand circuitry, there was every chance that you could get 240 volts or 220 volts or 110 volts, whatever the voltage was, coming out the end of the violet wand and onto that rod. So, you twitch it on, you grab hold of it, and you touch something. Now, one or two things at that point might happen. Either one of you might die or both of you might die. Now, if it was the person you were treating that died in the 20s, provided it wasn't your mother-in-law, what if it was your mother-in-law? Provided it was somebody, you could sort of somebody down the street, you could pop them in the back garden, bring the appropriate people, get in touch with the appropriate person here, and take the body parts away and give you a couple of quid, get rid of them. But I've heard that it's actually frowned upon to kill people with violet wands these days, so no way. If anybody ever is tempted to buy a violet wand, a basic violet wand, and it's got a metal rod in it, please, please, please throw it away. Do not use it. Do not even touch it. Do not even put it in there. Well, I would say that do not buy a violet wand that you know nothing about and even try it. You've more of a chance with a glass electrode. But bear in mind, most of these things are 80, 100 years old, and the wiring, if it's never been touched, is going to be in one hell of a state. I've seen one that people have bought off eBay for not a lot of money and said, can you check it out for me before I use it? And I took the top off and I thought, I'm glad you said before I use it. I'm sure you've seen several horror stories. You take them apart, the wiring, bear in mind that the wiring wasn't PVC insulation, it was rubber. Rubber deteriorates very, very badly, and basically as soon as you move it, it all falls apart. And that's where the problems lie. A fire was not a problem. Bear in mind there was no fuses in those days. Now, that's why a lot of the old ones you see don't come with a 13-amp plug on. They come with a bayonet connector on, because going back to where they were plugged in the houses, they probably didn't have plugs in those days. They had one electric light socket, and they come and take the light bulb out, plug it into the light bulb, pull the thing, and off you go. And the amount that you see that have got the old bayonet connectors to go in a light socket, because that was the only place that you could get an electric connection in the 20s, 30s, or even before. So the violet wand with a rod is extremely dangerous, as is any violet wand that hasn't been checked over by somebody that knows what they're doing. And I mean somebody that knows what they're doing. They are quite a complicated piece of kit. They're not just an electrical, they're an electromechanical piece of kit. So a good knowledge of how they work, and I'm still learning, I've been doing it for a lot of years. Sometimes you look at them and you think, I don't understand how this one works. Some of them are so complicated. I think they make them complicated just to get at the competition. You know, and so you've come across them and you think, half of this isn't really needed. This is just so when the competition look inside one of yours and think, oh, we can't make one for that. Yeah. One thing happened in the UK, strangely enough, is badge engineering. It's not a thing that happened in the 60s with BMC, you know, with Austin and Morris and all that. They did it a lot with violet wands. You've heard of Mr. Pye of Blackpool. That was a chap that basically must have been one of the main sellers, certainly in the north of England, of violet wands, under lots and lots of names. He was a distributor rather than a manufacturer. Lots and lots of violet wands were sold under different names. Maybe he was a manufacturer, I'm not really sure. I've tried to go to Blackpool to find out, but it's sell fish and chips now, not mine. Very disappointing, really, but expected. So there was a lot of badge engineering. Everybody claimed to be the best make, but at the end of the day, different boxes go inside them, and they're all the same. It was just a matter of how deluxe you want to make it worth a little bit more to the potential customer. So, moving forward, how did the key world get involved with violet wand? As I said, my first sort of finding out about a violet wand was in my late teens, possibly even early teens. I don't say that really. I found a violet wand in my grandparents' loft and plugged it in and lit it up. I thought, this is funny. It makes a nice smell. They give off ozone, which basically is the smell you get at the seaside. I think, well, that's quite cool. And of course I tried it out, and I'm sure many, many more people, that was their first experience of violet wand. Now, obviously, the first thing you do is try it on your skin, because there might have been a leaflet, like there were many leaflets. I've got quite a collection of ephemera showing you how to use a violet wand, and it says hold it against your skin and turn it on, or turn it on, hold it against your skin. So you do that, and then you think, well, and when you move it away, that's when you get the spark. And we're all paid for it, aren't we? Let's face it. And the spark is good, and the spark is nice, and the spark is full. So in the probably 70s and 80s maybe, there was a big, big influx of people that thought violet wands are the way forward in the kit world. Electrode play became a thing at a big rate. And the rest, to a certain extent, is history. There are violet wands still made by, one company, Hello, still make them in France. mainly supposedly for the cosmetic industry. Funnily enough, they're not allowed to sell them in America anymore. There was a very, very big manufacturing industry in America, but since the mid-50s, 1955, when there was a lawsuit against Masters by the US government that said basically what you are selling is a load of rubbish, it doesn't do what it says on the tin, you are selling something that is not real, and they basically sued Masters, and that was pretty much the end of the company and the end of the industry in the States, because it was pretty much, well, illegal, but basically you couldn't sell something that wasn't real, and it wasn't, it didn't cure ailments. So that was pretty much the end of violet wands in the States. Latterly, there have been various violet wands sold which are modified things that are used for other things like refrigeration leak detectors. Yeah.
Just a quick one on that subject. I don't know if you might not recall this one. There was a guy in South Wales that was prosecuted 15 years ago for claiming to cure cancer with a violet wand. I mean, literally, it made the papers, because I was like,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. It was the last one that I was aware of. It was like 15 years ago.
In Wales?
Yes.
I didn't know about that.
Down near Newport, some scammer, and he got absolutely ripped in papers for it. But, yeah.
Well, because the bottom line is that they don't cure anything. But by hell, how fun. And let's face it, every single one of you here thinks, how much fun are they? And if you haven't got one, you haven't tried one, you need to try one. And I've got one. If you want to try it, we can try it. You don't have to do. I've got the demonstration here. What I will show you is something that's quite interesting. I did mention earlier the secondary contact with the metal bar. The problem with that is the 240 volts getting to the one, which is a major problem and is dangerous. But the fun of it is, from the geek point of view, probably the most fun you can have a violet wand is using yourself as a violet wand and using it to touch other people. You've heard the expression, as I've mentioned a couple of people that have been talking to me out there, when we first kissed, sparks flew between our lips. Well, they really can. And, we're all adults here, which lips they are, and what they're doing in your own bedroom. It's entirely up to you, but you've heard of electrode sex. Well, there really is such a thing, believe you. It's fun going in, it's fun going out. That's one in the middle. But there you go. Just on that note, there are actually internal electrodes. I think I've got one there. That's a strange, actually, thing that works. Yeah, that's an internal electrode. I've got one that's a bit slimmer, which is a bit less worried than the other set about there. They were used. One of the things that they purported to cure was venereal diseases, syphilis, gonorrhea, which they didn't. But of course, again, if people have faith, and it's all about faith with regards to violet wands, if people believed enough, and I suppose you could say that violet wands were the forerunner of a lot of homeopathic remedies. But don't get me wrong, I'm not poo-pooing homeopathic remedies, but the more you believe, the more chance you've got of it working. And if you've got a horrendous case of syphilis, you'll try anything. Bear in mind, this was way before antibiotics. So internal electrodes were a possibility. Now, I can guarantee that sadly they didn't cure syphilis. But strangely, again, a bit like the baldness thing and the nicks, because they give off ozone, and ozone is itself antibacterial, which is funny enough one of the modern uses for violet wands we're working at the moment. Because they're antibacterial, they didn't cure syphilis, they didn't cure gonorrhea, but they were quite good with fungal infections like thrush and that sort of thing. So if you got a lady that went to the practitioner and said, I've got something really bad going on down there with itches and burns, and I went into it too much, and the violet wand was put in use, and I use the word in, with some accuracy, then okay, it wouldn't cure syphilis, that's for sure. But it could well cure thrush, which might go hand in hand with it, and a few weeks later she would feel quite considerably better. And I don't know if you know much about syphilis, but it does tend to come in waves, and maybe she would feel better, she'd go back for another dose of the violet wand, and maybe another, and then sadly a couple of years later she'd die. madness. You know. Anyway, there you go. The man was getting money, so that again is another thing. Because it's anti-bac, that is one of the few uses of violet wands. And violet wands now, so they weren't made anymore. Electromechanical, powerful violet wands of this type are not made anymore. They haven't been made since about the 80s or thereabouts, apart from one company that hangs on in there in France. There are lower powered units that are made for the cosmetic industry. You can still see them advertised for 40, 50 quid on eBay, on anywhere, Amazon. And they come with several basic electrodes. In fact, with some on there, they come with a little flat one and a little pointy one and a little mushroomy one. And funny enough, generally they're neon coloured rather than violet coloured, just because it looks more impressive, I think. And they're used for cosmetic problems. They can use to cure skin complaints, pimples, spots, acne, and they do actually work as alleged. I don't think so. Again, the anti-bac properties of it, they do cure things. Now, they are very, very much lower powered. And certainly, if you're thinking of using a secondary contact with them, then they do tend to lose it pretty much. Sadly, there are quite a few companies that rebrand what are fairly cheap Japanese-made electronic solid-state violet wands as cheap violet wands, and all they do is put them in a fancy box, triple, quadruple the price. Now, I would say, buyer beware, you get what you pay for. I think I've only ever owned 3 of those in my life, and all 3 of them packed up having to wait a couple of months maybe. I don't know why, they just don't seem to last. You get what you pay for. So, I have them basically to demonstrate what they look like. They do look very much like a violet wand of this kind, except all you get is that bit and a plug on the end of it and a control up there. And the white plastic and very crappy. Best thing about this electrode. So that basically is a potted history of violet wands and what they were used for and what we as Kingsters now use them for. We use them for fun, and I think the fun use of them far outweighs the medical use of them. At least when we're using them, we know we're using them, and it's a true use, and we're having fun with them. Where sadly all people were paying to have them used to cure medical problems were basically being common. But then again, that's happened many, many times over the centuries with travelling shows, with medicines to cure all sorts of things. It is, you got to have faith, but at the end of the day, it's rubbish. Right, let's turn them on. Let's look at one. There we go. There's another one. This is my personal set. I've had it for a lot of years. It's been moving through thick and thin, and I kind of like it.
How much is it?
Don't know why. You're all saying. No, that's not true. So there we go. We'll turn that on. This is the posh one, it's got the time. One thing I will say about violet wands is you should never turn them on for too long. Bear in mind they are very old devices, and even though when I sell them as restored units, they've been rewired, electrically, mechanically sorted out, and cosmetically, if you're buying one that you want cosmetically restored, they can't stay on for a long time. This is why more expensive sets have a timer, 6-minute timers, some of them 10 minutes. The idea of that is to remind you to turn it off after 10 minutes. Theoretically, you then should give it at least that time to cool down before you use it again. But when you look at the period literature, it suggests that most treatment for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So then, if you're only treating one ailment, you'll put it on for 10 minutes, then we'll leave them run. Nowadays, we tend to use them a little bit longer than that, but use them with respect. If you've got one, don't expect to go to an event and use it all evening. Expect it to be performing as well at the end of the evening as it did at the beginning of the evening, because they will lose power or eventually cook themselves. Now, that's the last thing you want, because if you cook the coil, it's quite an expensive repair. So treat them with care, turn them off. If you feel that the wand is getting warm, then it's time to turn it off, let it rest for a little bit. don't be tempted to hold it up here, because if you hold it there, sometimes horrible things like that happen. And the last thing you want to do is drop it. If you drop that, 9 times out of 10 they made of vaporite or other very brittle plastic, and they break, and then once they're broken, you've got another repair. So hold them down here, out the way, away from the coil. Also, that's where the main part of the coil is. If your hand's out the way of it, then it allows the heat to get away. If you've got your hand around it, your hand's warm, keeping it warm, not good. Let the heat get away. So hold it down here, save the electrocute yourself where you don't want to. It's the other person who wants to electrocute. That's a fairly basic electrode. And as you can see there, there's a spark jumping between me and the end of the electrode. As I said earlier, if I was a practitioner in the early days, I would hold it against my skin like that. And there I am, being cured of rheumatism. And it feels quite nice, it's quite warm. I can feel it being warm. Now, had I got rheumatism on my arm, I would actually believe it was getting better, and it would be getting better for a few minutes. I've got the money. But you've got to admit it's not doing that. You know, that's got to be better, hasn't it? That's got to be more fun.
One tip I would share, particularly when you first start playing with something like a wand, get yourself an egg timer. Because if you don't have a timer on the wand, we all do this. You get engaged in an exercise, you're having a lot of fun, you're enjoying yourself, you look at your watch and 3 hours have gone by. So when you're in the throes of exploring and having fun, there is always that tendency to try and push it a little bit further. You'll lose track of time. Have that egg timer, a manual one, just to ping off, have a cool down, and then start.
You do mean an egg timer that actually makes a noise rather than one of those with sand in it.
Yes.
Because if you're busy electrocuting somebody's nipples, you're not likely to go and check whether all the sand's gone through. Well, I wouldn't anyway. Yeah, a timer that makes a noise. Or of course you watch, not you watch, your phone. Just stick 5 minutes on your phone and an alarm, and just keep. Most phones, as you know, will do 5 minutes and snooze and 5 minutes and snooze. But do it 5 minutes run, 5 minutes telling somebody what you're going to do next, 5 minutes on again, and you'll make your violet one last. As I say, until you've got a more expensive kit that come with timers, and then of course it's not infallible. As soon as the timers tick down, you can turn it up again anyway. So it doesn't. It's not like you've got to wait. But if you want to look after your violet wand, don't use it for any longer than they were designed to be used. Some are better than others. I've got this one is pretty good. I can use this one. This is why I like to stick with this one. I can use this for at least a couple of hours, and it seems to carry on. I've got other ones that if you give them sort of like more than half an hour, you think, oh, what's happened to this? It's rubbish. But let them cool down, maybe a couple of hours, or maybe even next day, and they're back again. Part of the problem is, of course, changing to modern capacitors, which you should do. A lot of the early machines had wax and paper capacitors, which basically melted when they got warm, and then stopped being capacitors and started being short circuits, which was never very good. In the interim, after the early wax and paper capacitors, they made a lot of metal case capacitors. And I don't necessarily change those out for a very simple reason. They absorb a lot of heat. And if they're absorbing heat, the heat isn't staying in the wand. Now, I've known other companies that have always replaced with modern capacitors. And of course, then the wand starts overheating because the heat isn't being taken away from the wand. So sometimes it's worthwhile keeping a good condition, perfectly working metal capacitor in, because that's what it was designed for. It was designed to absorb some of the heat away from the coil. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
It works for me anyway. Treat your violet wand nicely, and it will do a lifetime service. I say I've been selling them for a good number of years. I offer a 12-month guarantee on them, and I'll be honest with you, I've never had one back. That's because I keep changing my phone. But anyway, that's a basic electrode. That is one that comes, simplest one that comes in most kits. It's what's called a concentrator electrode. That's an actual basic one. Again, that's a mushroom electrode, which is not quite as savage. Just going away from that. that is another alternative to the metal rod and a far safer one. If you can get hold of one of those, that is a secondary contact. The only disadvantage over the secondary contact I'll show you in a minute is it's got the big advantage over the metal rod in so much as it's not going to kill you. As you can see, it's quite a vicious piece of kit, but it's quite okay to be able to grab hold of that. And there I am being a violet one rod. See, I'm a violet one now.
Yeah.
No, that's all right until that drops out of there and breaks on the floor. So this is where I designed something that is unique to me. Well, not unique to me, but this particular design is unique to me. This is one thing that it's very, very simple, and I sell for not a lot of money. I've seen other versions of it, but that works quite well. The last thing I want to do is break a very, very valuable Bakelite one. So if you're going to use a secondary contact, put it in there. It can't fall over, roll over. They're round. If they're made in hexagon shape, as one manufacturer does, they've got a hexagon rim on them, they don't fall off. And I think there's a company in America that actually makes little hexagon things you can put around. But if you put that in there, which is quite simple, then it can't fall on the floor. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, and others, is a visible safety spark gap. Now, basically that means I can do the secondary contact thing as one would do with the metal rod, but safely. Because, as I said earlier, if something goes wrong with the wand and you kill somebody, in those days it wasn't that much of an issue, but if I kill somebody, apparently it's frowned upon killing people with violet wands. I don't know why, it seems legitimate to me. But this precludes you from doing that. How it works is quite simple. There, visible spark gap. That's what it says on the tip. It's a spark gap, it's visible, it's a safety spark gap. You can see it. Now, what's happening there is the high voltage, high frequency is jumping across that gap and going up this wire to this part here. There's this one. It really is. Because you've not got any glass in the way, so it's quite powerful. That is kind of quite biting. One thing that can never happen is that the 240 volt will jump across that gap because it physically can't. 240 volt will not jump across a 5/8 gap like that, no matter what happens. It just won't. So that is the safety aspect. The visible part of it is there, so I know that it's working. Now there are other manufacturers of safety spark gaps that make them, and all they do is get a piece of high voltage cable like this, and they chop the end off, and they put a metal crimped end on, and then they continue along the way there. Now the safety spark gap is between the end of the copper core inside there and the metal crimped outside part. Now there's two reasons why that can be a problem. A, you've got the spark jumping across inside a very small enclosed space, and B, you can't see it. And when you first buy it, it's working. Now, what tends to happen is they get warm. And when they get warm, the inner insulation tends to melt. And when it melts, the end of the copper core, which is the inside of the wire where the electricity is coming through, droops. And then after a bit, it touches the outer bit. And it carries on working. And you don't know that it's no longer a safety spark gap because it isn't anymore. It's just a piece of wire coming out. You're back to the metal rod. So I've seen those. I'm not trying to criticise other people's designs, but a safety spark gap is the way forward. Other people make them with glass rods that have a series of little glass balls in, and then one metal ball and one glass ball.
All metal, one glass.
Yeah, lots of little ball bearings inside the glass, and then one glass ball, and so it travels up all the metal balls and then jumps across the. So same thing, you can see it. If you're going to get a safety spark gap, get one that you can see. I make these, they've always been good for me. And of course, this is a handy bit of kit, unlike some other people that make them with a flat plate. This is quite handy because not only can you hold it in your hand, you can hang it off things. Like your belt. Or anything else. They do come in several sizes.
Tuck it into your boot.
Yeah, you can do that. So you can put it in your belt, you can do that. And of course this leaves you free to be, and make sure it's in properly position. So there you go, turning that on. There I am a violet wand. Don't look any different, do I? You didn't make that happen, did you? I might have done.
Yes. Yeah. This is one of the things you need to be aware of, is that sometimes if you plug it into the wrong circuit, it will cause other things with the discharge, such as the flash in the photo booth, to go off.
Oops.
That's all right.
What I would suggest on that storage, if you're using one, try not to have other electrical things near it, laptops, possibly watches. It makes my TV just disappear. DAB radios, it pretty much knocks out. But it doesn't damage them, but they just don't work with
EM radiation.
Get metal rings on, and they get warm.
No, I've never noticed so. You can get some pretty good sparks from them. The metal rings, metal jewellery. Health-wise, even people say, what about if I've got a metal hip or, titanium? No problem. The only thing I would suggest heart-wise is not a good idea for people with pacemakers. Apparently, if you touch somebody with a pacemaker, it stops it. But then if you touch them again, it starts it again. I don't see the problem, but
Insulin pumps are the other one. they're a little bit more forgiving, but the NHS get upset if you keep frying them.
So anyway, there I am. I'm a violet one. Come on, who wants to see that I'm a violet one? You crazy person. You want to hear the electricity? Wow.
Amazing. Okay, sure.
Now you've got a real good belt because you're sat on the floor. Yeah. This guy didn't get such a good belt because he's got boots staying over here. Feel the difference?
Yeah.
No. You've got conductive ass. That's what it is. Anybody else that's try?
I bet you. There's a bit of that's close. Oops.
Oh, that's nice. You want to hear it? That's not pleasant, is it? It's initially you think, oh my god, and then after that you think, this is the tension. I just have to check. Might be pretty good. There is such a thing as an electro sex, trust me. Very cool. And also quite impressive in the dark.
One of the feedbacks I often get is that some people report the skin is very, very sensitive after wanding. And I was in a club probably about a decade ago or so, and someone came in, oh my god, what's that? Want to try it? I have a couple of electrodes for internal use, some modern stuff. We played with it. This person wasn't particularly into it, and they're kind of like, yeah, you know what? I can feel it, but it's not doing anything for me. So they went on to another club, turned into apparently a rather large gangbang. Came to see me afterwards and went, oh my god, I have never tingled like that before. Because all of a sudden, you didn't have to have someone who was proficient at having sex, because already massively stimulated. But there we go.
I will agree.
I think we are about time for us to clear the room and get the next workshop. So if you don't mind, thank you very much indeed.
I've not kept an eye on the time. If anybody has got any questions, give me about 5 minutes and I'll be back round my stall. Quite happy to answer any questions you might have and actually give you a close-up demonstration with the pilot one.